Hello, everyone. Welcome to the VMware Cloud Foundation webinar series. We are excited to have two VCF Professional Services experts here today to talk to us about how to converge VMware vSphere to VMware Cloud Foundation 9.0. We will begin in just a moment. We're letting everyone join. Hello, welcome to this Zoom webinar. There is a Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. So please, if you have any questions, put them into the Q&A widget. Do not put them in the chat. It's hard for us to respond and reply. Please use that Q&A widget. It will just make everything easier and really help you get your questions answered. There are a few great professional services resources that are written by our experts on the VCF blog, and that link will be put into the chat in just a minute. But knowing that there are great resources on how to converge, how to upgrade, lots of great things for you. Some of you may be joining us for this is almost a part 2 of a series that we started a few months ago, upgrading VCF 5.2 to 9. Now we're going to be speaking about converging. So excited to dive into this topic. We have a great hour for you with demos and lots of insights to help you along this process. I'm excited to turn it over to Jonathan McDonald and Brent Douglas, our VCF Professional Services experts. They'll introduce themselves. Feel free to use that Q&A widget.
Thank you, Rachel. Let's jump right in. So my name is Jonathan McDonald. I know some of you from previous sessions, but I am a master architect on the portfolio services engineering team here at VMware, and so my specialty is VMware Cloud Foundation, VMware vSphere. I've been around a few years, so I've have quite a bit of experience with some of these topics. I'm also joined by Brent Douglas, and so he's also a master architect on the portfolio service engineering team with me, and he specializes more in the vRealize operations or VCF operations constructs of our platform. And so, as Rachel said, today we're going to be talking about the convert process for our VMware Cloud Foundation environments. And so our agenda, we're going to just have a quick overview of a few of the functionalities and the features of what we're going to be talking about. And then we're going to jump right into your converting and importing sections. And then hopefully we'll have a bunch of time at the end for some Q&A. And so we've taken some feedback from previous sessions where we didn't show as many of the the little details that could be useful during the converge and the upgrade process. So we do have quite a bit of content there. So we may skip over some of it if we know we're a little short on time, but yeah, let's jump into it. All right, so let's talk about Cloud Foundation. And so VMware Cloud Foundation, I'm sure you guys have probably seen this slide before. I think I've used it in previous sessions, as well as some of our leadership probably has as well. Just want to do a quick level set for Cloud Foundation, being that what we want to do is represent the fundamental shift to how customers really approach deployment and building of a private cloud infrastructure. And so rather than doing everything sort of standalone, it brings together your vSphere, vSAN, NSX, operations, automation technologies to really make it a singular platform for all these pieces. And so it's been a bit of a transition from the older days where each product and platform was something you had to deploy independently. Everything's all done completely within it. And so that's something where merging these things together allows us to have a really awesome story for how you can deploy not only traditional VMs but containers, and how quickly you can build and deploy your environments and VCF environment. Bringing in all those operational procedures that that we've come to love. And so before we get more into it, Simon, let's pull up our first poll here. We want to get an idea of the current version of vSphere that you're currently running in in your environment, so that we can sort of address your stuff as appropriate. So we'll give a few seconds to to do that.
While you do that, I'll offer a quick reminder. We are here to help facilitate you get up to the latest version of VMware products. Doing so helps you take advantage of the latest features, capabilities, and security enhancements. So Hope you are able to leverage this material to get off any legacy versions, 6, 7, as you move to vSphere 8 or VCF 8, excuse me.
Yeah, and we're always around to to do that. Our goal is to to make sure people are successful in those upgrades as well. So we'll give it another couple of seconds here before we end our call. We've got a pretty good quorum of people that are responding, and so we'll just end it here now. And so it looks like from what we can see, our results are showing that the vast majority of people are in the vSphere 8 range. So that's perfect because that is where our starting points are in some of these environments. Some of the older ones, they'll take a little bit more time and effort to to upgrade, because you have to make sure you get to an appropriate version of 8 before we get any further there. So definitely good insight. Thanks for sharing that. All right, so let us jump in to really what we're here to do. And so in this particular slide, what we're talking about is the 3 typical scenarios that we have for getting to VCF 9. And so in the last webinar that Rachel had mentioned, we did scenario 3. And scenario 3 really was around, hey, you already have VCF, I want to upgrade. Scenario 2, which is what we're talking about today, is the Converge process. So we want to take an existing environment without having to blow it away and do a brand new fresh deployment, as we sort of note in scenario 1, such that we can just basically add the new stuff that we need to our environment. And so the Converge process, there's 2 kind of pieces of it, right? So there's a convert and there is an import. And so let's jump in and talk a little bit about each of these. So the Converge process, the convert process is where we're basically taking an existing environment and we're going to add all the stuff that's needed to bring your environment up to that VMware Cloud Foundation level. So that means you're going to add, if you don't have NSX, it'll add NSX. If you don't have VCF operations, it's going to add operations. And most importantly, if you don't have it, you have SCC Manager, which is a part of your regular VCF install, it's going to basically get that installed and running. So what's going to do is it's going to take an existing vSphere environment that you have, and it's going to basically make that the primary management domain for a VCF instance. Now, the second piece is the import process. And so that import process is basically saying, hey, well, I maybe already have VCF, but what I want to do is I want to take that vSphere environment, I want to import it as a workload domain. So they're sort of complementary because, if you don't have VCF, you can get that first initial instance up. You can do a second one if you need to, or you can basically take an import with an existing VCF and operations console, do that. So we're going to get into in detail, these processes to do both of these things as we go through the presentation today. So before we jump right into that, though, I want to bring up a couple of points of clarity, things that are important with VCF 9 that we never had in the past, and that is that we've sort of changed around some of the constructs. And so if you're used to VCF, the first thing you're going to see is this whole idea of a VCF instance, and so that means you'll have your manager domain and workload domain. So that has been a concept with VCF for some time. But it is something that we want to make sure that that you understand that as we move forward with 9, that basically moves into something where we're building the whole idea of a fleet as well. And so if I build out this slide fully, you can see that this fleet construct is a 9.0 concept that allows us to basically add 1 or more VCF instances to this fleet, allowing us to manage stuff in multiple separate locations, etc. And so that also allows us to make sure that depending on the boundary that we've set for where we want our fleet to be, we have our automation or operations instance that is for that particular fleet, such that we can reduce the amount of size that we have for some of the the components that we need, but also provide as much functionality for that private cloud as we see fit.
Hey, Jonathan, you mentioned new
Yep.
construct. What's the relationship between the legacy vSphere environment and the construct here in the Converge process?
Yeah, so the original VCF construct is just that instance, right? And so the instance here where we just have your management domain is some workload domains. So this here. Now the fleet allows us to to build on that such that we can add additional fleets to expand capacity, as well as that failure domain for for the different workloads. And so, for example, right, I mean, you have a limit of 14 workload domains you can add to a single VCF or SDC manager instance. And with a fleet, you can have more than one SDC manager instance, meaning you can manage more things in the environment, that sort of thing. So it is something that is a little bit of a mind bend to to get used to with 9, but it is something that it's pretty straightforward once you have those pieces sort of thought about and built out in your environment. Okay, so for the import process, or import and converge process, it's something where we do have some requirements. And so, depending on your VCF version, there will be different requirements. So we're going to jump into some of these requirements in the demos that we do have. But effectively, there are different requirements potentially if you're on or going to 9.0 versus if you're going to 9.01, 9.02 or beyond. We've fixed some some issues. We've also added different supportability scenarios for those particular things. Also, if you have NSX versus not, there's other requirements. I don't want to jump too much into them here now, but it is something that our next section is really going to get into that converge process. So we're going to do a deeper dive into some of these pieces. But before we do that, we wanted to see how many people. And so let me jump into our next poll here. So Simon, if you can pull the poll up, please, that'd be great. But effectively, we wanted to basically see if people have used converging or import processes before. And we can see the number of things that people have.
Hey, Jonathan, you've introduced two concepts, converting and importing. Is there an advantage of one over the other, or is that a fair comparison?
Not really a fair comparison, but it is something that they are two completely separate things that would be used for different purposes, right? And so if you don't have any SDC manager, you have no VCF deployed, then you have to use a converge. You can't really use an import, right? But if you have how you have VCF or you want to add a different VCF, then that's something where you might use a combination of both imports and converges to basically bring your environment from the older legacy to be managed as as a single entity under the VCF sort of construct. So definitely something that I think will help us to sort of understand where people's interests kind of lie. So we'll give it another few seconds here. We're getting some great new responses in here. Yeah, I'd say, Simon, let's end the poll if we could, and we can take a look at our results. So it definitely looks like not a lot of people have used the feature, so that's good. I mean, that's something where you'll learn quite a bit, hopefully, from the next sections here of our presentation, because it looks like there's a few people that have done the operations, but yeah, the vast majority of people you have not. So that's definitely, I don't know if it's good news, but it's definitely news. That's just this webinar should be super useful to show how we're doing these things. All right. So let's jump right into our Converge section. So our Converge section, really what it's allowing us to do is to to utilize, like I said, that existing infrastructure that we already have, as long as we meet some of the the minimum requirements for the pieces. So I'm not going to read every single requirement, obviously, but effectively, there's two basic scenarios with and without NSX, and then also you have to make sure that there are a few things like you're using LCM images, right? You can't use baselines anymore, so we have to upgrade any clusters we have to use images. Link mode has to be broken if you are using the enhanced link mode functionality. You have to have some some assignments of IPs, that sort of thing. So it's something where you will definitely show the the entire process. I've got a lot of stuff in the demos for some of the processes to remediate environments as well. I think probably have too much, but you never know. I mean, it's something we can skip through some of it, if we need to. And the other thing I just want to call out quickly is that if we are running VxRail right now, it's something that we don't have any any details, so we can't really run some of these processes yet on VxRail. But I do know Dell has has some processes moving forward that will be appropriate for that as well. I don't have a lot of details right now, but it is definitely something that I've know is coming. All right. So this is what the the interface kind of looks like. Right. So, I mean, previously in previous webinars that we've talked about conversions, and even imports, that sort of thing, it was something that was command line based. You had to muck around with some JSONs and YAML files, that sort of thing. Well, in VCF 9, the big change is that we've added this stuff directly into, at least for the Converge process, into the VCF installer. And so this is the main installer that we have for VCF. And what this allows us to do is it allows us to basically say, hey, I'm going to deploy my new fleet, but if I have any existing components that I'm used to, and so as we can see in the screenshot, we have vCenter, NSX, or VCF operations. These are things that we can take into account right as a part of our installer workflow, right? And so this allows us to basically take these environments, do an assessment on them, and bring them into into the configuration. So let's jump right into the video because I mean we have a lot of stuff in here, and so it's definitely something where this is my lab, my terrible lab, but it allows us to to get right into our process here. And so I'm going to first pull up the VCF installer, and so this is similar to what Cloud Builder used to be in the older days. And really the first thing we have to do is we have to basically just configure our depot. And so I've already done the configuration of the depot. But I'll go in and show you where basically essentially we have to configure our depot, our credentials, and then we have to basically figure out what it is we want to have and what we want to actually download for our version. So you can see I had switched over from the 9.0 versions to the 9.0.1, and that allowed to me to go in and download that. So I've already done that because that takes a bit of time, obviously with all the different things. But once the the configuration is done there, and you have the version that you're working on, ready to download, we now can basically go right into, the deployment wizard for, VMware Cloud Foundation. And so in this case, we're just going to do a new fleet. And so we're going to go in there and, basically configure that. And you can see first thing we offer is the ability to specify an existing environment for Converge. Now, obviously, we have to make sure we have some of the prerequisites met, and we'll show what that looks like in just a second here. But effectively, right from the installer, we go in and we basically say, hey, I'm going to do my vCenter. I don't have an NSX manager attached to this one, so I'm not going to do NSX with this one, but it's a similar process when we're doing NSX, so we're going to show that process. And what that's going to allow us to do is go and say, hey, what do I want to basically not have to deploy? And so once I give my general information, give some details on my instance name as well as the naming for my management domain, as well as my availability. I'm just filling out some of the basic details that we need to have for this type of installation. It allows us to effectively go in and specify the details of anything that we don't have, but also it allows you to give the details of the stuff that you do have. And so in this case, I'm just filling the details for VCF operations here, just some domain names. I'm not going to configure automation at this time. We can deploy that or import that after the fact. But then it's saying, hey, existing virtual center. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to specify the details for my existing virtual center server, and give the the root password as well as the SSO password. And so what this is going to do is it's going to do some basic checking of the environment. And so once I confirm these thumbprints, what's going to happen is it's going to give me, it's going to do the first level of that checking, right? And so you can see that it's saying, hey, for this version, you don't have NSX configured, so we can't proceed at this time. And so this means that is one of the couple of paths for the Converge process is that we have to make sure our virtual center is upgraded to 9.0 before we can actually run the actual Converge process. Now, if NSX was already deployed, we'd be able to click through and be able to perform the NSX upgrade as a part of the the virtual center upgrade as a part of this Converge process. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and I'm going to upgrade my virtual center server. And so if I flick back over to my vCenter instance, what I'm going to show is I'm going to show how we can do and use the reduced downtime upgrade process that's a part of the later versions of Virtual Center. And so if I click over to the Virtual Center and the Upgrades tab, you can see right here we have the Virtual Center upgrade portion. And so if I go in and I add my ISO to my Virtual Center VM, I can basically go right in and start this process to upgrade my Virtual Center server. And so I don't have any backups here. I did back it up outside of this, so I can select that and click next. So backup is really important, obviously, in case anything goes wrong. But once that's done, I then can go and get into the upgrade. And so the first thing that we need to do as a part of this workflow is make sure we've upgraded the Virtual Center Upgrade Wizard to the 9.0.1 version. And so it's right there. It'll do it right on the screen. And so it takes a few minutes to do this, not really too long. But once that's done, you would just have to refresh our browser plugin. And so it'll do that here. And you will be able to get right into this upgrade process for Virtual Center. And so now that that browser plugin is updated, I just have to go to the upgrade tab, which they moved around in this version, and we can continue with this process. And you can see it's now ready for running pre-checks. And so I could click that button. It's going to run a bunch of pre-checks, and it will let us know what it is that is or isn't wrong for this Virtual Center upgrade. So it takes a couple of minutes to run, not really too long. But we can see that we got an error message saying, hey, your distributed virtual switch version is not great enough. And so what we're going to have to do is, before we're going to be able to run this upgrade, we have to upgrade this distributed virtual switch. And so to do that, I'm going to switch over to my distributed switch. And you can see I have upgrades available. And so I can then right click on this distributed switch, and I can just perform that upgrade. So that's seamless to to traffic. But what it's doing is adding the new features for that particular version. So just make sure everything is supported for that, and we can do that. Brent.
I need to interrupt you. A common thing in question: there's a VxRail theme and there's a standard switch theme. Could you briefly comment on this? Happy to have you save it till the end.
So with VCF, we recommend using distributed switches. I mean, so that's something that you will walk through, the configuration of that later on in one of the demos. It will work without distributed switches, but it is something that it is limited in some of the functionality that we provide. You said there was a mention of VxRail, Brent.
We'll get to that. Let's save that for later. Okay. That's
the VxRail. We don't really talk too much about it here, but yeah, we will have more details. With some of the future of VxRail. So. All right, so once that's upgraded, we can go back into our upgrade wizard here, and we will be able to run that pre-check finally, and it'll be successful once it runs that pre-check. So again, we want to provide as much detail as we can in terms of hey, for this particular configuration, we want to basically make sure we're going to be good to go for that Virtual Center upgrade. So this process is something that people have maybe seen before. And so we're going to configure our target VM. But with Virtual Center upgrade between versions, we do have to do a reduced downtime upgrade. And so we're going to have to deploy, hey, where are we going to deploy this? Select our target. We're going to have to basically select the configuration, which I'm just going to use the same configuration here. And then basically just some details for the temporary appliance. And so this is something where you'll give the the password for our our newly deployed 9 appliance, and then the next section will just go through some of the details for the network settings here as well. So once we specify our addresses here, this will allow us to basically you get this appliance deployed. So this, again, the first sort of step of of our process here to basically get our Virtual Center up and running to an appropriate version to be able to do the configuration. Now, once we have that all done, we're ready to start our actual upgrade. And so when I click the Start Upgrade button here, we will be able to see our upgrade of our appliance. I'm going to do a manual switchover of the configuration, or sorry, an automatic configuration of the configuration. And it's going to run through. So this can take some time based on the configuration of the the pieces that we have. We're going to speed through here in the video, obviously, but this is something where our configuration is is very much going to be upgraded as a part of this progress, and our switchover, as you can see with this process, is done right here as well. And so once this is upgraded, we can open our vSphere client, and our vCenter is going to be upgraded to the appropriate version for for this configuration. So I'll log into the client here, and what we'll see is we can see that our vCenter is now on the appropriate version for 9.0, so the 9.0.1 version. So once we've done that, we can switch back over to our VCF installer, and we're going to basically rerun this check. And so I can acknowledge this again, and it's going to be able to proceed based off of that. And so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add the configuration for NSX. And so NSX is something that allows us to to the virtual networking piece, and it is a required component. And so once we enter the details for our NSX appliances, and the passwords, we're going to be prompted for the SDDC manager piece. And so this is sort of the heart of our VCF instance. And so we'll drop in our root username and passwords for all the different pieces here. And that kind of is it for our installation, because we already have all the other pieces deployed or available. We don't have to provide any other things like your ESX host. And so we go through, and the first thing that's going to do is it's going to run the validations for our deployment. And so it's going to run through all the the standard sort of stuff. However, you'll see the existing components thing is taking a little bit longer to run, and that's going to give us details on, hey, well, what do we need to do to be able to make sure this environment is up to the standards that we need for the Converge process. And so there is quite a few things here. So I have a lot of detail in this deck on some of the, or sorry, in this video I should say, on the different things. And so if I go down here in this window, you can see that we have several things, right? So we have we have an upgrade our ESX host cluster, and so that is one of the the mandatory requirements as well. And so that also means, hey, well, we don't have images set up, so we're still on baseline. And so that's, I think, the first thing that we'll show here is we're going to go through and we're going to take a look at upgrading our ESX host, because that is the primary thing we have to do. But as a part of that, there are also things like turning on SSH. We need to do that on the vCenter appliance. DRS isn't configured, so we have to configure that. And so we're going to start off, like I said, with doing the actual cluster itself. And so if I go into my cluster and I click on the upgrades tab, this allows us to basically get our image set up. And so this is very important, obviously, because VCF 9 does not support baselines, that we get the image set up. And so we can use just a basic wizard to say, hey, well, here's my current cluster. Let's proceed with that particular image. And that will allow us to basically get this completely set up for our cluster, such that we will no longer see that error message in our compliance checks. And so you can see the images appropriately set up, and we'll be able to give it a name here of whatever we want. So I'll just give it my current version as the the name, and I can select any add-ons if I need to. Click save, and then we'll finalize that image setup. And so that will allow us to get the the image completely set up for our configuration. And you no longer use baselines. We're going to be using images for the actual the upgrade of our ESX host. And so this is the way we do it moving forward with all of the different versions of ESX. And so now that we have our images set up, we can see that we're good to go with that image setup. And so that's one of the key things that we have to do. So now, how do we actually do the upgrade? So we'll go into our lifecycle manager, and I'm going to upload the new 9.0.1 image into our configuration. And so here, just going to select the depot, and we'll get that imported. And so this is just you adding this to our image depot so that we can create an image for 9.0 that we can use to upgrade our cluster.
Jonathan, I'll interject a few questions about OEM images. They can be used.
Yep.
VMware supplied one, correct?
Yep. You can use the the VMware or the OEM supplied images. And so if I click actually over here, Brent, as a part of the image creation process, this is something where we can use whatever version of image that we supply. And so you can see this image version here. I'll just give it a name first. But then you can also add the vendor add-ons, right? So that allows us to to make sure that not only can we use a a Dell image or an HP image, but also that your ESXi version is also appropriate for that. And so if there is a custom image, that's where it can be specified. And so once we have all that set up, we can save our actual image here, and that's kind of all we have to do. And so what we're going to go over to do is we're now going to go to our updates tab, and we're going to assign this new image that we just created into this particular cluster. And so once I do that and click next, I'll click assign. It'll run a compliance check. And so once that compliance check is done, what it's going to do is it's going to run a remediation on this particular cluster. So there's some pre-checks and stuff you can do there as well. I know this cluster is okay, so I'm just going to click the remediate button, and it's going to go and it's going to speed through here the configuration of of our image to be able to get these hosts up. And so this is pretty standard process with images. I haven't done anything really special here, but yeah, you'll see that it's going to go through, and it'll speed through this here in a second because I've sped up the video. But effectively, it's going to allow us to see all the details of it doing this this installation of ESX. And so each of these hosts will be upgraded to the appropriate the appropriate version here. So everyone will go through the reboot here as a part of this. If you run into any errors, it will be something that it'll tell you what the error is. You can correct the error and and go through that. So nothing too, like I said, nothing too crazy here about about this process. But yeah, I mean, we do have to get this cluster upgraded before we can proceed forward with that that conversion process. The other thing I'll show here is now that this is upgraded, is it will show you the process to upgrade the vSAN. So if you go into the vSAN configuration tab of the cluster, you can upgrade the vSAN volume by doing the pre-check here and then clicking the upgrade button. So this allows us to to upgrade that vSAN disk version as well. So it's something that's typically pretty seamless. You may or may not want to do this as a part of the the individual upgrade. Not required for for an upgrade, but we do recommend that. Definitely is something you at some point would do. So yeah, it takes a few minutes to do that, depending on the amount of storage or the amount of data in there. But yeah, once it's upgraded, that means you have your ESX hosts good to go. And yeah, we can rerun that validation. So now that this validation is run, we can see. I'm just going to go here. You can see that we no longer have the the issue that we were seeing with the cluster is not upgraded. And so there are some other issues that we do see, right, such as the standard switch stuff, as well as the vCenter does not have SSH enabled. And so I'm not going to go through all that because we are starting to run a little short on some of the time. I do want to get through the import process, but effectively, if I just sort of speed through some of this here, to do the SSH stuff for vCenter, you can log into the VAMI interface, and let me just play this from here, where you can go into the access control, and so that will allow us to just turn on the SSH logins. So that's another hint. You have a quick and easy way to do that. And then if I go a little bit further, we will go through the creation of the distributed switches. And so if I go here, you could see that you were just going to add the VM kernel adapters for those switches, etc. And it has to be done on each of them. But once that's done, we have everything converted over into the appropriate configuration for for that VM kernel. The final thing that that was showing is within lifecycle we had a different setting for one of the settings. And so if we go into there, you can go into the images configuration. This setting was the one that was missing. And so once we set that setting, we can basically save that and go back over, and once we run that validation, those validations will be complete. So there, like I said, there's a lot of detail, but it's something that each of these different error messages show quite a bit of information as to exactly what you need to do, exactly what's wrong. And so that allows us to basically very effectively say, hey, I need to remediate this one thing. And so in this demo, I didn't show all the pieces in the direct order, but in this demo, what I tried and wanted to do was to make sure that that you can see, hey, each one of these can be addressed. You click the rerun validations button, it'll take that error message away. You can go forward. That's the standard typical process for that type of thing. Once it's done and you have a successful validation on each of the pieces, you can then click to deploy. And so this, if you've run a VCF 9 deployment, this is what the installer looks like. The difference being that you see we're doing a convert instead of a deploy of vCenter, right? And so as we go through, it's going to do the SDC manager deployment. This here is showing the NSX deployment because we don't have NSX in this instance, so therefore we're deploying the new appliances for that. And then it's going to go through and it's going to deploy the VCF operations fleet and operations appliances. You'll see I've sped through the actual deployment process because it's not very exciting, but effectively it will go through and deploy your operations, your fleet, and your collectors. And so that is basically getting your environment right up to pace with what it is that VCF 9 requires as a base configuration. So once it completes all these things, your operations is up and running, and so you can basically go in and you open the operations UI. And so once I do that, you can see all the different pieces. And opening the UI will allow us to actually get into operations and actually see your converted environment and instance. And so these are all the passwords we've given, usernames we've given, and once we're logged in, you will be able to see the different pieces of this configuration, where you can see the inventory, you can see your vCenter, and drill down into that. Again, here's our cluster, and you can see that your versions are appropriate for what we've just upgraded our vCenter to. And so you now have the ability to even use the lifecycle. And so this is where and if I go into this section here, we can see that takes a second or two to load, but we can see that we have the ability to add components. And so this is where if you have an existing automation environment or that sort of thing, you can import it here. You can add a new one. You can also add a data debroker. So this is something where you're now up and running on VCF 9 with each of the components. And the last thing I'll show here is if I go down to licensing, you can see that we have the ability to configure licensing. So this is why operations is so important, is this is how you license your environment. And so this is obviously where we want to make sure that you are able to effectively operate and run your environment. And so that is our conversion process. So it is definitely something that as you can see, there's quite a few different steps. But it is something that, if you take it piece by piece, it actually is something that becomes relatively straightforward and simple to do. It's just you have to approach it kind of holistically, and you figure out what changes do I need to make. So our next section is on imports. And so imports is a very similar process, except for with our import process, we have the ability to, from VCF operations, import a virtual center as a workload domain. So this is something where it allows us to take, and I'm going to slip onto this slide here. It allows us to basically take, just like what we were doing for the convert, another existing virtual center, but basically pull that into an existing VCF instance. And so this is something where there are a lot of different pieces here, but is less strict than that Converge process or the convert process, because it's something that we can import as a workload domain. So it's a little more flexible, and you don't have to have as many the prerequisites met. And so this allows us to basically, take and reorganize our stuff into, that configuration. Let me think here. Yeah, so there are a few, interoperability things, right? Such as, LACP and, interoperability of hosts, that sort of thing. But effectively, like I said, it allows us to bring it in as a workload domain as is, tradition there. So that process, it's going to look like, like this, where effectively when you do the import of a virtual center server, we can basically specify, the external vCenter server, and it's going to allow us to do that. So with that, I don't want to take too much more time on slides. Let's jump right into our demo of this. And so we're going to skip through a couple of the pieces just so we're short on time, because we already showed some of it. But effectively, once we're in our operations console, we have VCF up and running, we can go into our management workload domain here, and we can basically import another additional workload domain. So this particular one is the one we're on. And so if I go to my SDDC here, and I can go and I can add this workload domain by clicking the drop-down menu. And so I want to add, this second virtual center to this particular instance. So I'm going to do that. And so this here is the virtual center that I want to add. So I've done a few basic configuration details. there are still a potential, a few errors that will come up, once we do the workflow. But essentially, it's pretty simple, pretty straightforward to basically go in and just say, hey, I want to import a vCenter, and then I just have to provide the details for the particular environment to be able to do that. And so I'll first give it a name that I want to import it as. And so once that's done, I can then go and specify my vCenter. And so if this vCenter is already on your existing configuration, you can select it from the list. Otherwise, you'll specify the existing one. I'm just going to enter the details in for my vCenter server here for the import. And so I'll enter the details. I don't have an NSX attached, so I'm not going to enter that. But what that means, I'm going to have to deploy NSX as a part of this. And so I can first accept the thumbprint here. And you'll notice that the first thing before we do anything else, it also is going to do a bunch of pre-checks. And so this is very similar to the pre-checks we previously did, where basically it's going to go through and say, hey, these are the types of things you need to fix in this environment before I'm going to be successful in the import. And so if I go down here in this list, you can see it checks an awful lot of things, but you can see things such as, again, I don't have the VM kernel set up. You can see that I have still using standard switches. So in the middle of this process, I will go through and set up a DVS again. And then if you go down, you can see that I still have also some different parameters set, as well as DRS not enabled and DVS version. So we talked about many of these things. So you can see some of the very similar things show up as a part of this. And so I'm going to skip through some of this, but effectively we're going to go in and do the configuration of the distributed switch. We're going to configure the VM kernel ports, etc., on this particular cluster to be able to get it up to snuff based off of the configuration errors that we see. And so I can always go back in and rerun the validations to see what else do I need to set or change. And so you'll see green checks go forward with each of these. And so this is just me turning on DRS basically. So again, I don't want to waste a whole bunch of time going through similar steps, but effectively, again, you're going to go run through those validations, and once that's done, you get to a point where you are validation successful, and you'll be able to proceed forward. And so none of these things have crazy issues there. Is basically all very well explained as to the type of things that you'll see. And so even if you don't proceed forward with the configuration, you can just go in here and you'll get a validation report on the configuration to make sure that everything is good to go for that particular configuration. So it's definitely something that it does seem a little intimidating, but once you actually take a look at the individual errors, it's usually pretty straightforward to figure out what it is needed there. And so that's where PS can definitely help to help through some of those processes if need be. So yeah, let's take a look through. So once we have that done, one of the things that that is a part of the VCF 9 experience is you don't necessarily have to have the management cluster, which is a 3-node cluster for NSX. We actually allow you to do a single host deployment as well. And so as a part of this, if I configure the NSX single node deployment, you don't have to specify as many things in the interface. But if it isn't something that's supported by the workflow that you have, and so if I do that, I'm just going to click through here, I'll enter some passwords. What it's going to say is, hey, when I run that validation again, oh, hey, look, I have to have a 3-node. So this particular configuration requires a 3-node. So I'll have to go back through and configure that. So that's something to know, is that certain configurations may not be supported, but we do have these validation functions built in to make sure that we catch any of the errors before they actually cause a disastrous error during that upgrade process. So I'll go back here, run through the configuration where I'm going to switch it, and you'll just fill out the additional names of the the resource we have. Once that's done, we do have the the validation will succeed, and we can go on to the next piece. And so once you have those successful validations, once you fix some of the error messages that we see, it's just going to go through, and you'll see a standard sort of prompt happen for, hey, I'm ready to do this, I'm going to import it. And so you can see in my my interface here, I have initializing my domain, but then also there is the actual import process as well. And so if you refresh these screens, you can click in and you can see the actual status of each of the the different tasks that are that are available for for that. So not super exciting. I mean, if you do see any error message, it will you'll be able to monitor it from the vSphere client. The deployment of the the appliances. but it is something you can restart if you do see, an error message pop up that can be, that can be addressed. So it's something that sometimes it takes a few tries to get all the error messages out, but it is something that once you're done, you'll get a successful message, and yeah, you'll be able to see this in our infrastructure. And so if I go back to our inventory, you can see my new domain is now added as a workload domain. You can see that's on the older version with the older version of NSX. And so, yeah, that's something where we can now go in and run our lifecycle on this. And so if I click into the to the lifecycle piece, I can go to my workload domain, and that's where I'm going to be able to provide these updates so that I can run the actual the upgrade of my environment. So now that I'm here, I can click plan upgrade. I can select my version. It's going to pre-check, make sure that you're running in a version that is supported. And so in 9.0 it isn't, but 9.0.1 it is. And so this is something where we're capturing a lot of error messages here. We've done a lot of pre-checking to be able to make sure we're good to go with the different pieces of of the configuration. So I'm not going to run through the individual upgrade of each of these pieces. If you're interested in that, our upgrade session walks through each of these steps in in great detail. But effectively, it is something where that is an import. It's a lot simpler than the Converge, but it does allow us to basically get these things into your SDC manager and allow us to get to a point where these older vCenter environments can be managed by your SDC manager and then upgraded using those appropriate configurations and tasks. And so that again is the way that we run through some of these upgrade procedures and policies and processes. That's kind of what I have here today for our demos. But before we go and get into questions, let's run our last question. So Simon, if you can pull up our last poll here, basically, after having seen some of this, are you guys interested in using this functionality to convert or import stuff into VCF?
You folks you've kept me busy on the Q&A. Lots of great questions here. Let's see. Just throw a question out there while folks take the poll real quick.
Sure.
If I import more than one virtual center, do I have to deploy a new NSX instance per workload domain? Or can I just join it to an existing instance? This question actually came up a few times. It's a version of this.
So yes. So you can either specify a brand new one, or you can import two once you have that initial one set up. So you have to have at least one, but you can then import other domains to that virtual or to that NSX if you choose to. So it is something where we do allow you to share.
Superset question, is NSX required?
Yes. Now, whether you actually implement it beyond the management domain, it is something that it is not required to actually configure the TEPs or that sort of thing. A lot of people just use a standard VLAN, VLAN backed transport zones to be able to do the the networking functionality.
The management domain, yes, required. Workload domain, not required.
It's you still have to have NSX configured, whether it's an existing one or you're using a new one. So it does have to be at least NSX configured for each workload domain, whether that's something that is, like I said, actively used or not. I mean, that's sometimes some people are waiting to do that, or sometimes people jump right in and take advantage fully. All right, well, I think let's end that poll and we can jump into more questions. So I mean, I think that we got some pretty great details of of the different scenarios here. So that'll definitely help us to understand what people are thinking and that sort of thing for the different time frames that we have for VCF. So with that, let's jump right into the questions, Brent, because I know we have quite a few quite a few good ones.
You touched on this, and you kept me busy. I appreciate the questions. I'm not going to get to all of them, but again, the VxRail question came up a lot. Yep. Briefly summarize again. What is there is no VxRail support specifically, correct. Or would you add, can you mix VxRail and non-VxRail nodes?
No, not at this time, not for 9. So basically, the way that the VCF 9 has changed the configuration is that in previous releases, Dell used a very specialized functionality, specialized process. So during the Cloud Builder deployment, you'd specify VxRail. So that changed the way that the workflow worked to be able to provision VxRail using VxRail Manager and the Dell pre-configured configurations. Now with 9.0, we no longer have those specialized workflows, and so Dell has been working pretty feverishly on basically changing their workflows to be using the the standard ready node workflow, right? So everything uses the same workflows now. There's no difference, there's no change. And so that's something where in the future, from my understanding, we will have more details and better way for, or not a better way. I mean, Dell will be able to bring VCF VxRail into version 9. So that's something that I don't have exact dates or anything like that, but it is something that is is coming in the future, from my understanding.
Two other ones that came up quite a bit. Can you speak briefly to the loss of connectivity during the upgrade?
Loss of connectivity to like individual components or
of workloads.
So workloads won't be impacted by the majority of the upgrade. The configuration or the way that the upgrade of ESX hosts, that would be the only one that would have a potential. However, what happens as a part of the remediation process, upgrading stuff to VCF 9, your VMs will all be vMotion to other hosts, right? So there should be, theoretically, there should be no or zero downtime of the VM workloads, because each host that we're updating will be updated as a part of a maintenance workflow of that particular host.
So yeah, that's, again, I'm going to stress what Jonathan said. We very strongly recommend the use of distributed switches versus other types. So because
as well as DRS, right? Like DRS is what's going to automatically move stuff, right? So if it's somewhere you don't have DRS, you don't have vMotion configured, right? Then you're not going to be able to run this workflow without having done some sort of maintenance piece. So that's something that as a part of the configuration, right? I mean, this is why DRS is required or recommended, right? This is why we do DRS or distribute switches, right? Because that allows us to make sure that we can minimize the amount of downtime that we would need to have as a part of some of these rolling upgrade events. The other thing to note is that obviously while vCenter is being upgraded, right, this is where the reduced downtime piece comes in, and that switchover window is that during that switchover, yeah, vCenter is going to be down. Right, but this is where it allows us. I just did it automatically, right? But in environment, that's where we have the manual switchover. So you can get a maintenance mode. The switchover can happen during that maintenance mode, where it's going to basically take the existing virtual center, turn it off, switch you over to the new upgraded virtual center. And you're good to go, right? So that's something where that would be the only other sort of thing where you would have downtime that would be a potential for at least a vCenter component is while that's actually happening.
Another common theme is the role, you touched on this, but I think it's worth touching on again, the role of VUM versus LCM and what happens during the process.
Well, so there is no more VUM, right? So basically vSphere Update Manager baselines, those, they aren't supported in 9.0, right? So that's why during the videos and as a part of the upgrade, we have to switch the clusters over to being image-based, right? Because that's using vSphere LCM images, to be able to to perform that upgrade, right? So VUM basically it's gone in 9. Is all lifecycle manager images, right? And then if you're talking LCM from a VCF perspective, right, that is something where it's uses the same mechanisms with vSphere as well.
Role of SRM during an upgrade, during convert or import.
SRM, we don't take that into account as a part of as a part of this this upgrade workflow. But yeah, it is something that if you do have SRM in the environment, you will need to upgrade that as a part of that workflow as well. So you just have to take that into account as an additional component. So it is not something that is it was taken into consideration from a VCF perspective. It's sort of in addition. So it's not going to detect that, but yeah, as a part of that, you would need to upgrade VUM or SRM appropriately.
One thing he touched on was the prereq checker in 9.0 is much improved from previous versions. Do pay attention and remediate. Take the time to remediate each of those items before you proceed. With some will allow you to proceed, some will not. But our recommendation is remediate them all. Understand the consequences of the remediations. Conduct those and then proceed if you're able to. So let's see here. VxRail. Yep. Role of non-vSAN storage. Saw it come up. Saw a Nutanix reference. Also saw an iSCSI reference.
Yep. So depending on versions, there are different principal storages allowed. And so with converts and imports, if you have existing fiber channel or NFS storage, those can be used as primary storage for for your like for your management domain now, which previously that was not something that was allowed. So it does allow for more flexibility in in your environment. You don't no longer have to have vSAN for some of these components based off of some of the versionings that we have. So you just have to take a look at there's a storage reference in the documentation that that storage reference shows which principal storages are allowed for each of the different versions. So it has slightly changed over the version. So I don't know the exact details for each and every version, but yeah, we do allow non-vSAN principal storage for management and workload domains.
Let's maybe do two more. Had a great comment. Generally, what's your experience with upgrades? What are some gotchas that customers miss? What are some things that people can do ahead of time to prepare for a better, meaning higher success rate of conversion or import?
So in my opinion, I would take a look at the that installer or the convert workflow, right? I mean, I think to me that's one of the biggest things that the convert and the import workflows. If you can run and take those prerequisite checks, right? Like you saw me go through, probably more than I should have in the demos, right? But there were a few things in my environment that needed to be addressed, right? You can get a sense of exactly what you'll need to happen to be successful very, very quickly, right? So again, things like the DVS versions or that sort of thing. Those are the primary things that that I think I run to in almost every environment that I do. Right, is something where you'll have to make sure that certain things are supported and on the appropriate levels. And so, Brent, if I don't know if we've posted the the links that that I had mentioned on the perfect, yeah, on those things. So those are things like take a look at the prereqs, take a look at at that sort of thing, run through like those wizards and see the validations as they happen. Because effectively, like there's not one thing that is always a problem, right? But it is something where you'll always see certain things that you'll need to do or change, right? And so the thing that I always try to do is make my configuration look as much as VCF as I can, right? So in some of the demos, right, what I do is I always make sure that I don't configure a DVS or have an old version of a DVS there, right? So that way you can sort of see, hey, well, if I am not on an appropriate thing, that that I would be able to mimic what that looks like, and then I have to obviously configure that appropriately, right? So I think that that's the number one thing I always do is take a look at what my versions are, because if you need to upgrade prior to doing a convert or even an import, that's something that you might have to take a maintenance window to do that. But making sure that you're meeting those prerequisites as they come up is something that I think is like I said, incredibly important to be able to do. So
final thing, I did share the planning a successful VCF migration or deployment, excuse me. Do look at that. With that, turn it over to Rachel. Wrap it up.
Awesome. Thanks, Brent.
Thank you, Jonathan and Brent, for sharing those demos and those great insights. I know that our audience super appreciated it. We had over 100 questions coming through that Q&A. So I know you guys enjoyed it. We will be sending out the recording in your email within about 24 hours. So keep an eye out for that and bookmark this page because you can come back and view the recording. Thank you all of you who've joined us to the VCF webinar series, and we can't wait to see you next time. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks so much, everybody. Bye, Rachel.